Good afternoon, everybody. Jambo, Mbote, Mbolo, Initie, and so on. I'm going to give you a keynote. For that, I need to put that on the screen. It should appear miraculously. Okay. I'm going to give you a sort of a personal take on forest landscape restoration. So it's not necessarily C4 talking, or it's just me and my views about the topic. And like Eric, I will start by a little bit of time travel. Forest and landscape degradation is nothing really new. I mean, it's sort of, in 1936, the Anglo-French Forestry Commission was tasked of providing evidence of savanization of the forest in West Africa. In 1947, André Aubréville forecast the death of African forest in the first volume of Una Silva. In 1949, the same Aubréville wrote a 300-page book on climat and desertification in Afrique tropicale. When I arrived in Africa, the first time in 1982, in Cameroon, there was the very day President Aidjo gave the power to President Biya. And there was no mention on forest restoration. There was no mention on forest certification. Climate change was not an issue. The issue was about economic development and how can we use natural resources for economic development, timber, land. There was no Chinese influence. There was the France-Afrique at its height. Civil society, almost unknown. Multipartism, very rare. And democratic free election, not very common. And there was 480 million people in Africa. You fast forward 35 years, and here we are with the huge restoration pledge of the IFR 100. This is a snapshot of the website a couple of days ago. The recognition of the importance of African forests and savanna to fight climate change, to protect biodiversity and environment. The increasing importance of China and India as major trading partners, displacing the old colonial power. Huge improvement in democracy, free election, civil society, and there are 1.3 billion Africans. And for the next 20 years, another billion coming. So like me, this morning you had the chance to hear from the story of the voice of the landscape. Here I will try to offer a complementary, personal, and likely biased view about restoration. And I start by a bit of a contradiction with what we have been here. So the world and Africa are greener. So if you look at this paper, everything that you see in green is in fact an increase in tree cover in Africa during a period of time. Then you have the wonderful story of the Gao in Niger. So everywhere in the world, in fact, there is encroachment from savannas by trees. So it seems that we have more trees, but where and how? This is a very recent paper published in Nature that says that, in fact, tree cover has increased during the last 35 years. So we have more trees than we had before, but where and how? And then you see there is a greener in the Sahel, not that positive in the Zambesian region, and then the story that Eric was saying about China. So the main greening outside of the Sahel that is linked of restoration activity is in Northern Europe and in China, where unfortunately degradation seems to prevail around the Amazon and in the Zambesian domain. So we still have more trees. So are we out of the wood? Do we still need restoration? We do, and probably more than ever. We still have 12 million hectares of land that are lost each year to degradation, harming the well-being of about 3 billion people, and that costs more than 10% of the annual global GDP in lost ecosystem services. And here we are talking about trillions of dollars. So I guess we are a bit like the Red Queen in Alice in Wonderland. The Red Queen has to run all the time to stay at the same place. So if we restore 12 million hectares per year, we stay at the same place. So if we want to run and move, we have to run twice as fast as the Red Queen. And land degradation is a pervasive systemic phenomenon. It occurs everywhere. And for those of you that have read that, I suggest that you read the IPBES report that was published in 2018. That is the latest summary on forest land degradation. And the message from the IPBES report, besides the one on land degradation is a pervasive phenomenon, is that there is an urgent and concerted action needed. Otherwise, land degradation will worsen, and the problem is that it will become more and more costly. The cost of inaction is huge, and we need to do something about it. Why is there degradation? Because you have some drivers of degradation, and here is a snapshot of the IPBES report, and you see the driver of degradation for Africa. And in fact, the main driver seems to be rapid expansion and unsustainable management of cropland and grazing land, I quote the quote, causing significant loss of biodiversity and ecosystem services, food security, water purification. This has reached critical level in many parts of the world. So we need to address the drivers of degradation. Because if we don't address its driver, we can restore as much as we want, the land will be degraded again. So restore, yes, but where, how, and for whom? This is a map that was produced by WRI about the potential of restoration in Africa. And everything that you see in green has some potential for restoration. And Africa offers the greatest potential for forest landscape restoration. But we also need to be very careful, because any place that is without trees is not necessarily a degraded place, and that we have to remember that I think originally in the IFR 100, 40% of the land that was supposed to be restored was rangeland, so it's not necessarily only forest. So we need also to think about what we saw this morning. Restoration is about more than just the trees. Restoration is a question of landscape, as in a question of community rights. So we need to think about where to restore, why to restore, and for whom to restore. And unless we have the proper answer to this question, we are unlikely to be successful. And I hope that we will have some of these answers during the Landscape Forum. Now, I'm supposed to give you a science speech, so I will put a bit of science. And I have to say that in terms of the science of landscape restoration, I think most have been said or written already. I don't know if Robin Chasdon is in the room. Robin, you are here? I know. Yes, she's over there. So if you have a question about the science of restoration, you ask Robin. But fundamentally, one thing is important. It's understand what we mean by degradation and why we restore. And this is important because we don't have enough resources. We have to apply some triage. So we have to be sure where you want to restore and where you want to restore. And you have this study that was prepared by Jabori Gazul. And so this is what he calls the forest domain, but it could be the savanna domain also. And then you have different stages. And this stage, they appear more or less degraded. But fundamentally, if you let this forest by itself, it will go back to its natural state. So this whole issue of sylvigenesis, this whole issue of cycles. So where is it restoration? There is restoration when, in fact, you have something that is a stage of arrested development. In fact, when the succession is arrested, and when you need to intervene, then there is degradation. And then you intervene in restoring the forest. There is no need to intervene in a natural cycle. So there is not necessarily a need to intervene on a sustainable shifting cultivation landscape. So how do we decide where to intervene and how we define degradation and deforestation and restoration is important. And then the next question is, when you invest a significant amount of money in terms of restoration, how do you measure success? And success is not something which is absolute. It depends on the purpose of the restoration, and it depends on the chosen baseline. So if you look at the published literature, the Society of Ecological Restoration produced an excellent primer on restoration. But mostly what you read is about the return to an ideal pre-degradation ecosystem. So we want to restore the rainforest, or we want to restore the peatlands. Unfortunately, in most cases, this is not possible. We have reached a stage where you can probably improve the situation, but not necessarily restore the initial condition. Hence, the importance of keeping the initial condition where they still are. So, if I take this example, and it's not from Africa, I apologize, this is a degraded peatland in Indonesia, in the Riau province. What you see is water, marsh, something that is burning every year, generating huge amount of greenhouse gases. And if you protect this from fire, that's what you get in 29 years. So this is, people will not disagree, some success in terms of generation, or in terms of restoration. But you can also have that, an oil palm plantation. And I'm willing to challenge or to be topical, but I think that this oil palm plantation is probably better than the idle land, which is degraded, which doesn't mean that we should cut the forest to plant oil palm, but mean that we need to keep as much as we can of the forests that are still intact, and we need to make as much as possible in terms of production, in terms of economics, in terms of ecology for the forests that have been degraded. And now the next question is the money. Who should and how to finance restoration? And here you have some picture that and figure that were produced by WRI. There is about a shortfall of $300 billion per year in terms of funding for conservation and restoration. Sounds like a huge amount. Well, let us remind ourselves that the world managed to find every year $1,200 billion to produce weapons. So if we put our priority right, I think we should be able to find a few hundred billions to something that is probably our last chance of not going to a 3-degree world in 2050. So how do you make restoration an economic activity? And here you have big numbers. We lose 6.3 trillion per year to land degradation. And trillion is a number that has been mind-boggling for me. Anything that is more than 80, I cannot understand. But that's a huge amount. And then you read, otherwise, in other papers, and these are all from scientific papers, there is a net benefit from, let's say, 0.7 to 9 trillion simply by achieving the bond challenge. If you invest $1 in restoration, you are promised a $7 to $30 economic benefit for return. Do you know any financial investment, bonds, that brings you this return? And if we have huge costs to society, impressive returns, why is it that you don't have all the investors of the world knocking at the door over there trying to invest in restoration? Why are we not doing it? And we are not doing it because we need a paradigm change. We need to shift from the prevalent paradigm that says that restoration is very expensive. There is no financial return for the landowner. This is only for environmental benefits. These benefits are seen out of the market. These are market externalities. You rely on public funding, and this is a top-down mechanism. The new paradigm that we need to embrace, and all the people in the room, I hope, will be convinced, is that first, research and development and proper planning can considerably lower the cost of restoration. That restoration can provide increased incomes in terms of goods and jobs. It is an industry that will create job opportunities. And the resulting natural capital that you have restored provides goods and service to society that could be partially internalized and marketed. And we need blended finance and active participation of the private sector. There is not enough public money to do what we need to do, and we need to have a bottom-up approach. People matters in restoration. Thank you.